So I met Venerable Henching in 1986. I had ordained in Dharamsala in 1977, and I had wanted to become a Bhikshuni, but it was impossible to do that in the Tibetan tradition. We had to go to Taiwan. And fortunately, I had a friend who knew Venerable Henching and who had gone to Taiwan to take Bhikshuni ordination, I think a year or two before. And so she introduced me to Venerable Henching. So I flew to Taipei, and Venerable Henching picked me up at the airport and took me back to her flat. What's interesting is she doesn't remember any of this now. Yeah, but I remember it very vividly. And I knew nothing about Chinese culture, Chinese Buddhism, nothing. And she took me back to her flat and then put me in Chinese robes, which are very, very different from Tibetan robes. And I also had to learn about taking your shoes off when you go in the door, and taking your shoes off when you go in the bathroom, taking your shoes off when you go in the kitchen. And yeah, because in the US we do it differently. So, yeah. And then the next day she took me to the bus station, put me on the bus that was going to Kaohsiung. And so I traveled alone to Kaohsiung, got off the bus. Venerable Henching had arranged for somebody at the temple to come pick me up, which they did. And then I went back to the temple, and that was it. And then on the way back after the ordination program, she picked me up again and took me to the airport. So that was how I first met her. Yeah. And then I got to know her mostly through the fact that we both were very interested in the Bhikshuni ordination being made available to Tibetan nuns, and also in the Western nuns who were part of who had ordained in Tibetan Buddhism being able to become Bhikshunis. So those were the things that were really our common interests, that the ordination, the training of the nuns, and so on. And so we had a little group, Karma Lekshe Soma, Venerable Jampa Sadran, who else was in it? Venerable Henching and me. And then later we added a couple of other nuns. But we formed what we called it was originally called the Committee of Western Bhikshunis, and then we changed it to Committee for Bhikshuni Ordination. And yeah, and so we met in 2006, so that was 18 years ago, here at the Abbey. The Abbey was very new at the time, but we met because we wanted to write a paper talking to the Tibetan monks and explaining how the Bhikshuni ordination lineage was available in Taiwan and how it could be given to Tibetan nuns. Yeah, and there's something else I wanted to say before that, which I'm not remembering now, but I'll tell you when I remember it. So, um, so we gathered in our main building here, and for several days, I just remembered what it was. Is Venerable Henching, because Venerable Lecce Somo had spoken to her, had found different texts and material in Chinese that could be used, that were given to in the Tibetan government, the central Tibetan government, the government in exile, that it could be given to their Department of Religion and Culture, because His Holiness Dalai Lama and the person at the Department of Religion and Culture who was in charge, his name was Geshe Sering, and they wanted to see documents and proof from Chinese history that the lineage had spread there, that it was valid, that the ordination had been given as a dual ordination, da 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 da. Okay, and so Venerable Henching had supplied a lot of that material. Yeah, so Geshe Sering looked at it, but and this was quite early on. It was in the 90s even. But the Tibetans are very slow to change, They're a refugee population, so they don't feel so secure in their situation. And they're facing modernity at the first, at the beginning. So they very conservative minded. Okay, so Venerable Henching had provided a lot of that information. Then we met in 2006 at the Abbey, and we made a paper. We compiled a paper that talked about the history of Bhikshuni ordination in the Chinese tradition, and then how the ordination had been given, and some ideas we had for how it could be given in the Tibetan tradition. Okay, so we wrote this paper, we submitted it. Yeah. I think they may have had a few meetings about it, but nothing went anywhere. Yeah, but the committee continued to meet. We made a website and invited people to learn about it. And then actually in 2007, there was a conference in Hamburg, Germany, and it was organized by one of the universities there, and then also by Venerable Jampa Sedron. And so there were people, many of them were academic people who had researched Bhikshuni ordination. And then there were some nuns, some monks, Chinese, Tibetans, many German presenters to discuss, the Bhikshuni ordination. One of the things that was very shocking, we could say, is on one of the evening presentations, there was a big group discussion about the Bhikshuni ordination in the Tibetan tradition, and do the Tibetan nuns want it? There were a few Tibetan nuns at the conference, and they did not know much about it except what their teachers had told them. What their teachers had told them was the Chinese lineage probably wasn't accurate, and they couldn't take it that way. And second of all, that Bhikshuni ordination is too difficult to keep in our day and age. And if you just sit next to a man on a bus, you are breaking a root precept. So they heard this kind of incorrect information. And the monks were not encouraging them, because the monks, the abbots, the rinpoches, the very well-respected monks, had not come to a conclusion about it. So the younger monks who were teaching the nuns, really downplayed it. And So in this discussion at the Hamburg conference, some of the people asked the Tibetan nuns, "Do you want to become bhikshunis?" And some of them said no. They said, "We don't know what it is. It's too hard to keep. We'll break the precepts. Um, the Western nuns are pushing this. It's not really coming from us." And so many, many people were just like, "Oh my goodness." I mean, because most of us had thought that the Tibetan nuns wanted to be able to take higher ordination. I mean, you create so much merit when you do that. So we were really shocked at what they said. And Jampa Sadran, despite His Holiness Dalai Lama, had been saying all along, and he still says this, that he alone does not have the power to legalize bhikshuni ordination in the Tibetan tradition, and that it should be done with a meeting of some of the well-respected monks from all the Buddhist traditions meeting together, and all of them deciding together to reestablish the bhikshuni lineage in their own traditions. So His Holiness has always advocated for this. Venerable Jampa Sadran had thought that perhaps the conference would serve as something approximating what His Holiness wanted. But it didn't really, because the conference involved Western academics, and we didn't have like so many representatives from all the traditions, and they didn't gather together to discuss it. So there was a final panel, and some people were really expecting the Dalai Lama to say during that, "Okay, bhikshuni ordination is now established in the Tibetan tradition." Some people really expected him to do that and hoped he would say that. But he just repeated what he had always said, which is it has to be a group decision. He is not like a pope. He cannot make that decision for the whole Tibetan community, or for all of the Buddhists for that matter. So many people were very, very let down, and we went back to their rooms, and His Holiness knew that was not that the closing was of the conference, because this was the last session, that it had not gone very well, and that people had not really understood what he was trying to say. So actually, Venerable Henching and Venerable Wuyin were both there. They were roommates, and I and another nun went back to see them after this last session of the conference, and they were both kind of saying, "Why are the monks so stubborn about this? What is the problem?" Because in Chinese Buddhism, the ordination is available. There's no problem. The nuns are well respected. They keep the Vinaya well. The monks and the nuns get along. They didn't understand what the problem is with the Tibetans. Anyway, while we were there talking, we get a phone call, and the Dalai Lama had, knowing that people were very confused and unhappy about that session, and that everybody was leaving the next day because the conference was over, he called for a meeting. It was like, I think at 5:30 or 6 in the morning, and we all went and had another meeting with him. And he, again explained the situation, how he can't make the decision. And again, said that there has to be a conference, an international conference. Okay, so who was going to organize that? We had hoped that the Tibetan Nuns Project, or at least some of the Tibetan women, would organize it. The Tibetan nuns don't, at that time did not speak English. They were really rather sheltered. I don't think they could have organized it at all. And they also didn't know so much about the issue. It wasn't a big thing for them because what was changing with the Tibetan nuns is they could now become geshis and and have the same study program as the monks. And the Dalai Lama really wanted that for the nuns. He said he could institute that more advanced study program for the nuns, but he couldn't, make the decision about Bhikshuni ordination, even though he talked a lot about it in various discourses and teachings that he gave. So, yeah, so things just kept going on. Let me see what happened after that. I wrote okay. So one thing that had happened is backing up a little bit in 1998, yeah, there had been some conference in Dharamsala with some, Chinese abbots and also Tibetan lamas. And apparently, Venerable Dao Hai, who was there, at least we don't know if he wrote the paper. We have a feeling that that one of his monk disciples wrote the paper. But it seems like in the paper, he said that the Bhikshuni ordination in China had been broken. Yeah. And that it's supposed to be given as a dual ordination. When I took it, we didn't have dual. It was only the monks who gave the ordination. Okay, so Venerable Daya had seemingly said that in 1998. But like we say, we think that one of his monk disciples said that. You know who. So, okay, so yeah, so our committee for Bhikshuni ordination, kept going. But, I was very curious about, Venerable Dao Hai saying that because he was the Upajjhaya for Bhikshuni ordination. And if he thought that the lineage wasn't valid, he wouldn't be giving the ordination. And also, he was teaching the Bhikshuni Pratimoksha to all the Chinese nuns. So clearly, he thought that the lineage was valuable and could be, was valid and could be passed on. So in 2010, okay, this is 3 years after the Hamburg conference, Venerable Dao Hai was coming to the U.S. And I was friends with Venerable Jendi, who was close to the Wellington Temple, and I went to the Wellington Temple sometimes for posada. And Venerable Dao Hai was associated with those people. Anyway, when I heard that he was coming, I asked Venerable Jendi if I could go see him because I wanted to check, did he really say that the lineage had been broken, because it just didn't sound right. So, yeah, so we met at a house in Bellevue, I think it was, or Issaquah, somewhere around there. And and I went and introduced myself and asked him. And it seems like he said, I think it was sometime in the 16th or 17th century, that the emperor had decreed that the nuns were no longer allowed to go to the bhikshu monastery to receive ordination. And the ordination had to be given by the nuns and by the monks. So So when the emperor said that, then the idea is, okay, all the Bhikshuni ordinations stopped, and that's how it had been broken. But when I talked to Venerable Daohai, and also Venerable Benyan was there at the time, it's very unclear. You know, the emperor said that at a certain time, and then the emperor who came after rescinded it. Okay, so that kind of decree by the emperor was no longer valid. But even during the period it was valid, in the outlying areas, Venerable Daohai and Venerable Benyan said, it could still be that the nuns, they took the part of the ordination with the nuns, and then they went to the monks' monasteries anyway, because it was in an outlying area. The emperor doesn't know what's going on and doesn't care. So it wasn't sure that it was broken, okay? And then when I talked to Venerable Henching about it, she was adamant, and she said, actually, it wasn't just rescinded by the next emperor, but that about 4 years after that first emperor said, the nuns can't go to the Bhikshu monastery, that it was rescinded then, so that the ordination lineage wasn't cut. There wasn't even more than 4 years, in which that decree was operating. So more confusion. Um, yeah, but at least that was clarified. And when I did go back to Dharamsala, I told His Holiness about that. But of course, by that time, word had gotten around that, oh, even this great master in the Chinese tradition said the lineage isn't valid. Oh, so it was very difficult to clear that up. Anyway, we kept on meeting, and the committee for Bhikshuni ordination. In 2015, we published a book talking with recommendations and endorsements by some of the lineage lamas in the Tibetan tradition, expressing their opinion on Bhikshuni ordination. And that was very favorable. And then the booklet describes some ways in which it could be done. So we kept trying to, get the Tibetan nuns more interested, but they were really interested in their Bhikshuni studies now. That was the main thing for them. Then what happened? Yeah, then things kept going. This for a while, for many years there, the very high lamas from the different Tibetan traditions were meeting with each other, to discuss this among other issues. But they could never come to a conclusion that they all agreed on. It was, okay, but we don't really know. And then finally they said, well, if the Tibetan nuns want to do this, they can go to Taiwan and do it. And that's it. We're not taking any position on it. But of course, that doesn't work for the Tibetan nuns, because when you're a bhikshuni, if you, there's certain of the Sangha karma and certain bhikshuni things that have to be done, and you need to work together with the monks to do that. But the big issue for the Tibetan monks, was that the Chinese practiced the Dharma-guptaka Vinaya, and they were following the Mula Sravasti Vinaya. And how can you put two lineages together? Oh, yeah, it's like, oh, you can't do it. It's two different Vinaya lineages. And, because we were already by that time, I mean, even before, back in 06, we were saying that the ordination could be given with the Tibetan monks and the Chinese nuns, yeah, as a dual ordination. And then, since the monks were the ones who, who confirmed or gave the ordination, then the new nuns could be from the Mula Sravasti tradition, and that way they could function within the Tibetan community and do the various Sangha karmas they had to do with the Tibetan monks. But the Tibetan monks, we can't really decide. We're not sure. Not everybody agreed. Uh, yeah. Um, so, yeah. So, myself, by that time, I was already thinking about starting the Abbey. And in 2003, we found the land and with a building on it, and bought the land. And so Sravasti Abbey began at that time. And so, at the initial residence were just me and two cats. But gradually, more people started to come. And, and at first it was mostly women who came. Now we have a few monks, not many, but it's mostly women. And, um, and by that time, too, when those people requested ordination, then we gave them the Shramaneri ordination, the novice ordination, and the Shikshamana, the training ordination. And we did those at the Abbey. And this is where Venerable Henching comes in, because we had to translate the ordination ceremony and many of the texts teaching the precepts, the etiquette, all this background information that you need to be a monastic. Yeah. And so Venerable Henching helped a great deal with that, as did Venerable Jendi and Venerable, I'm so bad at names, Venerable Damsho will remember. I know their faces, but I forget their names. Sorry. But some other nuns, were involved and helped us do the translation. And at the very beginning, because we didn't have enough Western nuns to do it, the Chinese nuns came here. And so we had 4 or 5 nuns, and we gave the Shramaneri and the Shikshamana. And then as people then went to Taiwan to take Bhikshuni ordination. Okay, so that's how we've done it at the Abbey. So Venerable Henching, to bring, because this is about her, but I'm trying to give you the background information, is that she was concerned, very much about the making it so that the Tibetan nuns could become bhikshunis, and so that the Western nuns who were in the Tibetan tradition could become bhikshunis. And we had 2 different situations between the Tibetan nuns, or the Himalayan nuns, I should say, and the Western nuns. Yeah, because, now the Western nuns had their own monastery. We were living halfway around the world. We had a very close connection with the Chinese tradition because, that's where our ordination lineage came from. And the Chinese nuns were helping us ordain new nuns and so on. Whereas the Tibetan nuns were continuing as above with their studies, and they didn't know a lot about the rest of the world and things. At that time, you have to realize it was a refugee community. Yeah, and in the early on, it was really impoverished, and so they, now it's a different situation, but then they were really impoverished, and so whenever there were international conferences, the Tibetan nuns didn't go, They didn't have the money to go, they didn't know English. Now that's starting to change a little bit. And I think that their exposure to Western nuns and to other Buddhist traditions, um, it makes a difference. But again, still not very many go to these conferences because it's international airfare and the monasteries just can't afford it. So, but with the booklet we published and the talking, they're getting the idea a little bit more. One thing that became difficult is since it was mostly the Western nuns we were the ones talking to the Department of Religion and Culture, and saying how the Bhikshuni ordination could be done with Mula Sravasti monks and Dharmaguptaka nuns, that some of the Tibetans started saying, oh, it's just the Western nuns. They're the ones pushing. This isn't even, they're newcomers to Buddhism. They have this idea of feminism and equality. They are not part of our culture. And they're trying to incite something with the Tibetan nuns and push us to change in a way that we're not sure we want to. We don't know enough, And as a refugee community, they felt very shaky, very insecure because their primary purpose was to keep their own monasteries alive, and feed the monks because there were quite a few monks and there were refugees in India and people were getting TB and so on. Okay, so at this point, Venerable Henching is getting more and more active, especially with us, the Western nuns, okay? Because, the Tibetans, they're still talking and having these conferences, but they don't have those conferences anymore. They haven't for since they stopped it, like I think right before COVID. Yeah, but now, as we started building a Bhikshuni Sangha here, or even before they ordained as Bhikshunis, when they were shamaneris and shikshamanas, Venerable Henching very kindly came to the Abbey several times to teach us how to do the ceremonies. So not only help with the translation, and she, she helped Venerable Damsha in later years learn, how to read the Chinese Buddhist text in classical Chinese. And Venerable Damsha really started translating and became quite good at it. So Venerable Henching was tutoring her over the internet in Chinese. But, she came to the Abbey, and so she was, helping us learn how do we do posada, the fortnightly confession. How do we do that? So we finally had all these texts in English, but how do you do the ceremonies? It's not always evident from the text. And when do you bow, and who goes where, and where, who goes over here, and who kneels and who does what. So so the first time she came, actually it started out as we wanted her to teach Vinaya, but her way of teaching was very much to ask us questions, because one of the sticky things for us is we're living in a very different culture than ancient India, where the precepts were made. And also our culture is very different than Chinese culture. So a big question for the Western nuns, at least at the Abbey, was how do we practice in our own culture in a way that fits? Yeah, because we can't just start doing things that the lay people don't understand and think is very weird and strange. So the way Venerable Henching taught was to ask us, well, and uh, Venerable Wu Yin taught in a similar way. She taught us in 1996 in Bodh Gaya, but that was another program. Venerable Henching didn't go to that. It was in 1996 in Bodh Gaya. It was called Life as a Western Buddhist Nun. And so Venerable Wu Yin taught part of the Bhikshuni Pratimoksha at that time. So anyway, we had all these questions, and Venerable Henching, just asked us. We discussed it. She very much had that way of teaching, yeah. And for this situation, that way of teaching was perfect because we had to tell her about our culture and about how things are done and what people will accept and what they won't accept. Okay. Okay, so she came once teaching us like that, and then she came and taught us, the posada ceremony, then the varsa, ceremony. That's the rains retreat, and then the pravarana is the Sangha Karman that's done at the end of the rains retreat. So she taught us that. She brought another nun with her one time, and so together, I forget that nun's name. Venerable Damtra remembers it, but but they taught us how to do these ceremonies, and and then also much more about just the etiquette and so on, and so we learned that the three major ceremonies, the confession, restoration of precepts, the rains retreat, the ceremony at the end of the rains retreat. And then we also wanted to learn how to do katina. And that was a little bit more difficult for her to teach us because that one isn't very widely done in Taiwan. But she was looking in books and we were writing things and we got something organized. Yeah, that has the feeling and purpose of the Katina ceremony in it. So, so Venerable Henching, her attention was still with the Tibetan nuns, and actually, in fact, last year, when was it that, or very, no, when was it? Yeah, it was last year or early this year. She had, she wrote a letter to the Dalai Lama that explained in a much more explicit way some of the ideas of how the ordination could be given with the Tibetan monks and the Chinese nuns. And she gave me the letter, and I gave it to His Holiness's translator, who was able to give it to him. And so she was very intent on him receiving that letter. And that letter was kind of the culmination of all the research and help that she had given, really explaining it very clearly. And what she explained, Venerable Jampa Sadran had also, who is a Tibetan scholar and was reading a lot in the Tibetan Vinaya and the old Tibetan ceremonies, she came to the same conclusion. So that was very nice. But still, the Tibetans didn't act on it very much at all, in fact, that I know of. So, yeah, so we had a lot of connection with Venerable Wu Yin and Venerable Henching, since the Abbey started, but especially in recent years, much more connection. Yeah. And so one thing that I always had the aspiration to do at the Abbey was to be able to give the Bhikshuni ordination in English with a dual Sangha. Okay? So there's some things that need to be taken care of before you can do that. And, uh, I still need to ask permission, if I'm going to be the Upajjhaya, to ask permission from some of the Chinese monks. We have enough senior nuns, Western nuns, to form the Bhikshuni quorum, but we don't have enough monks with the required number of ordination years. Okay, so we still have some developing to do that. Also, the Abbey is still comparatively a small community, a new community, and we were been building because more and more people come and they want to practice with us, and now we have a sangha of 21 people, yeah, who are ordained, and of those 21, 17 are 16 are bhikshunis, and we have one bhikshu, and then we have two shikshamanas, and then two shramanera monks. Three shamanera monks, sorry. Yeah. So so Venerable Henching, is just really like so enthusiastic about, you've got to have the Bhikshuni ordination at the Abbey. And when are you having it? And it's like, Venerable Henching, we don't have a hall big enough to hold an ordination yet. We have to build that hall, So we've been building the Buddha Hall for 2.5 years now. It still isn't done. It's approaching being done, but still not finished. But every time I saw Venerable Henching, and even when I didn't see her, when it was over Zoom, when it was by email, when are you having the ordination? And and I tried to explain to her, there's some things that, first of all, to hold an ordination is incredibly, it costs a lot of money, a whole lot. And especially, I said to her, well, we're in an outlying area, so we could, instead of having 10 monks and 10 bhikshunis, we could do 5 monks and 5 bhikshunis. She said, no, you've got to have 10 of each, and, okay, but we're just trying to find the money to build the Buddha Hall, which is costing like way, way, way more than the contractor had told us. And she said, when are you having it? When are you having it? And she also, both of us had that same intention for the Abbey to hold a Bhikshuni ordination in English. But, and here's where a cultural difference between us came in, is in Chinese tradition, when you have an ordination, you make a flyer, you post it in various temples and in Buddhist magazines, and everybody sees it, and then anybody who wants to come can register, and they come. Well, the situation of Western bhikshunis, or Western nuns, the shramaneris, yeah, there's most of them are quite young, yeah. They don't understand Vinaya. They haven't been ordained long. Those ones who are in the Tibetan tradition, maybe they had some teachings on the shramaneri precepts, but not a lot of them. And they don't have a monastery to live in, so many of them have to work at jobs to get the money to live, to pay rent on a flat and buy their food. And it's not a good situation. This is one of the reasons why I started Sravasti Abbey, is because you can't really keep your precepts very well if you're working a job, with lay people, and you have to put on lay clothes and grow your hair a little bit longer, and you just can't do this. So since Bhikshuni ordination, or just plain old Brahmanari ordination, is new in the West, if you ordain people who are not, um, who don't know much about Buddhism, who don't understand what they're getting themselves into, because it's not a Buddhist culture. Yeah, many people had gone to India, they met the Tibetans, they ordained there, they didn't know anything about Buddhist culture. They didn't live with the Tibetan nuns or anything, and they had to, get jobs and somehow, or they went and pay for themselves, or they worked in Dharma centers with the lay people. So, because that was the case for so many of the Western nuns, uh, and because the ordination is so new here, it's so important that we really screen the people very, very carefully and prepare them for ordination very carefully. Because if you don't do that, but they get ordained and then they don't have any training, then they don't keep the precepts well, they don't act very well, then all the lay people lose faith in the Sangha. And we aren't a Buddhist country to start with, so then, all Buddhism gets a kind of weird name, if the people, the monastics don't behave well. So I was always of the position that, uh, we just screen people very well. We don't have a huge ordination. The people come, they live at the Abbey for 2 years, or at least the nuns do, the monks also. The nuns take also the Shikshamana ordination so that they know what they're getting themselves into. They have Vinaya teachings before they ordain as a Bhikshuni and so on. So I wanted to do things slowly and be very selective about the people that ordain. Venerable Henching is saying, but, in Taiwan, we just make a flyer, we post it everywhere. It's good, let everybody come. The more, the merrier. Yeah, and it's good. And then, don't worry, they'll ordain and then they'll, learn the Dharma. It'll all be okay. And I'm going, Venerable Henching, they don't have monasteries to go back and live at. They don't know much about Buddhism, let alone the Bhikshuni ordination. At the Abbey, we're just trying to financially, keep the Abbey together with the people that we have. But she's always, no, you got to do it big. And when is it happening? And so she and I would have these great debates. She repeated herself, I repeated myself. But throughout this whole thing, I mean, of course, we loved each other very much, and I really appreciated all of her recommendations. But I was just trying to explain the situation in the West as well as the situation with the Tibetan monks, because she didn't know how the Tibetan culture works and everything, and how conservative it is and these things. So, we had a lot of debates, but we loved each other very much. And then before she passed away, she left a donation of 10,000, no, 100,000 US, as seed money for when we are able to have the ordination at the Abbey. So that's seed money for a few airline tickets, probably. Yeah, but still, just really, training people, preparing them beforehand. but Venerable Henching, when people would contact me and want to become ordained, maybe they were Western nuns ordained in the Tibetan tradition. They were shikshamanas, and I would usually refer them to Venerable Henching, and then she often helped them, told them when there was an ordination in Taiwan and helped them out. So she was really keen on that. Now, I know that one of the questions was, what was her motivation? And knowing her and working with her as I did, um, she was so happy to be a bhikshuni. She was just, this was the life for her. She loved that life. And she wanted to make it available to as many women in whatever culture as possible. And so her motivation was one of really a bodhicitta, great compassion, and she worked hard to do what she could do to make this happen. And I think, of course, she was disappointed that it didn't happen before she died. But, I assured her that we would definitely have an ordination at the Abbey. We just have to get all the causes and conditions together. And so still we do what we can to help the Tibetan nuns. But one thing that we did realize is they have to see the value of Bhikshuni ordination themselves. And they have to go to the Tibetan monks and say, we want to do this, and share the ideas of how to do it with them. But compared to the number of monks in Tibetan Buddhism, the nuns are just very small number. Yeah, and in terms of the geshe, nun geshes, there's less than 100 now, I think, or somewhere around 100. So, probably not even that many. But, so they're, for the Western nuns, we want to support the Tibetan nuns, but we've kind of, at least I feel like I've done what I can do in terms of, making materials available and encouraging them. But what we can do, because I noticed one of the questions is, what can you do to help, at least with the Tibetan nuns? One thing I think would help is helping them to go to some of the international Buddhist conferences. There's one coming up in June with Sakyadhita, a Buddhist women's organization. The conference is being held in Sarawak, Malaysia. And I've been to a couple of them before. They're really wonderful. And you too should go, actually. Yeah, you meet Buddhist women from other traditions, nuns, lay women, and there's so many different activities and ways that we can learn from each other. Yeah. So helping the Tibetan nuns have exposure in that way, because I think if they could see, for example, how the Chinese nuns live and how they run their own communities. Yeah. And they have TV stations and they have radio stations and they have whole school buildings where they teach the lay people the Dharma. And when there's an ordination, there's hundreds of people who ordain. I think if the Tibetan nuns could see this, in Chinese Buddhism, in Korean Buddhism also, to see that the women who are bhikshunis are very self-confident and they're active and they take the lead and they run their own communities. Whereas in the Tibetan society, because the nuns aren't fully ordained, there's an abbot who runs their community. Yeah, they run the practical things, but the abbot is the person on top. It isn't even a nun. Yeah. So, and so they don't have a lot of confidence in terms of expressing, uh, you know, what they want in terms of ordination, and. So, but I think we had one Tibetan geshe, a female geshe, come and stay with us for a month this summer. And I think it was a really good experience for her. We didn't, talk a lot about Bhikshuni ordination and encourage her because, we had received criticism before that we were pushing them. So we didn't do that. But she came to our, when we did Posada, she came and she saw, oh, this is how a Bhikshuni Sangha does, the Posada ceremony and what the role of the Shikshamanas and Shramaneris is. So I think that kind of thing and seeing how we functioned, I think was quite good for her in terms of, again, broadening the mind and maybe thinking of things for the future of Tibetan nuns. I know another Tibetan nun who's in the States. She's very involved in learning science and translating science into Tibetan language. But she's another one that I think would be so good to, I haven't talked to her in a while, but for her to, and some other of the Geshimas too, to go to these conferences, to come and stay with us when they have a break, just so they can see how other groups of women do things. So I think, in response to your question about helping the Tibetan nuns, I think that is, one way, and a lot of it, yeah, it involves, yeah, just doing that and giving them the financial support. In terms of helping the Abbey, um, yeah, come and visit us. And yeah, and we need support too, but we really love, we have such a strong connection with both Tibetan Buddhism and the Chinese community. So, to strengthen that, I think is quite good. Okay, so I should look at the questions you wrote out for me to see. Okay, so I talked about the first one, her motivation and her contribution, translating, teaching, attending conferences, um, encouraging us. She helped financially, and yeah, so she just really believes in this. Yeah. Okay, then episodes that left a strong impression. And interesting stories. I think one was that time at the end of the Hamburg conference in 2007, when the other Western nun and I went to visit Venerable Henching and Venerable Wu Yin after, and and then going with to His Holiness the following morning, just how they were really disheartened, the two Chinese masters. They were disheartened, but they both, that's the thing about Venerable Henching. When she sees something is good, it's virtuous, she goes for it and she doesn't give up. Okay, so despite what happened in 2007 at the conference, she was back with us, and you're going to have an ordination at the Abbey and this and that, and helping people translate and helping people learn the Vinaya and coming here and teaching. And, when she sees something that is virtuous, that she wants, she's in it, she doesn't give up. And I've heard the same, she expressed the same quality. For example, in C beta, in the Chinese digital library, in anything that she did, she was there wholeheartedly and, you know, was gonna make it happen. Okay. So what unique qualities did she have? And ways of handling matters. Well, unique qualities, like I said, she had a clear mind about, you know, what she thought was worthwhile doing. And she had stamina and enthusiastic effort and went ahead and did that with everything. Yeah. And that's why I think she was so successful, in getting C beta going, getting the Chinese digital library going, all those kinds of things, because she just did it. Yeah. Um, okay, then what you can do to sustain or expand, I think I covered that a little bit. How many times did she come to the Abbey to teach Vinaya? I can't remember exactly, 2 or 3. She was here probably about a week each time. Yeah. But then we had many, many Zoom calls. Okay. So there were a lot of Zoom calls, and especially when she was helping Venerable Damcha translate things. What am I personally grateful to Venerable Henching for? Well, those qualities I said. I mean, first of all, what I'm really grateful for is just that she has such an expansive view of Buddhism, an expansive view of the Sangha. She wants to help the Sangha. It doesn't matter which Buddhist tradition. She just wants to help. And I'm very grateful for all the help that she's given to us as Westerners, but also all the help that and energy she put in trying to help Bhikshuni ordination with the Tibetan nuns. That hasn't come about yet, but I think in the future it will. I don't know how long it will take, but I think at some point the monks will decide it's okay. Yeah. So I'm also grateful to her for her example of also, not only her sticking to things, but her incredible generosity. The generosity in teaching us, the generosity in, helping us financially. She was incredibly generous and to everybody. Yeah. Um, one day when we met her in Taipei, and she took us out for lunch to one of these all-you-can-eat vegetarian restaurants. Well, you can only imagine with her generosity and like, eat, go back for more, eat some more. And we're all saying, we're so full, we can't eat anymore. Yeah. But yeah, that's the way she was. She just had this love for people and did what she could to help. When Venerable Damcho and I were at Foense earlier this year, because 5 of the Abbey nuns were becoming Bhiksunis. And Venerable Henching and Venerable Shaoyan, the abbess of Puyi Temple, came down to visit us. And, even when we first went there, Venerable Henching gave Venerable Damcho and I a big bag of treats and snacks. When they came to see us in the middle of the ordination, they brought more food. So, just that kind of generosity was really very touching. Yeah. Okay, so do you have other questions? I just kind of talked nonstop for a while. I didn't give you much of a chance.
师傅，
Mhm.
我这边就是想再
venerable. So
跟师傅这边请教的，就是说刚刚师傅有提到，就是
just now you mentioned
就是金色这边来交接。
Venerable Henching came to Sravasti Abbey to teach the Vinaya,
Mhm.
and you mentioned that when she was teaching the Vinaya, how she took the traditional aspect of Vinaya and Chinese Buddhism, how to adapt it to the West.
Mhm.
一些指导
And
跟
and Venerable Hengqin gave you some instruction on how to do that.
过渡的方式，让戒律能够在西方这个
How to adapt the Vinaya to the West so that it can be practiced in a Sangha community.
Mhm.
这个部分能够请师傅做一点点的分
I
享。
wonder if you can say a little bit more about what I guess the advice that she gave or how she helped us to figure out how to adapt the Vinaya to the West.
Hmm. Venerable Damcho, do you have anything to say about that? You can contribute too. Maybe if you start, I'll get some more ideas.
Okay, I'm talking in English channel. I don't think they'll hear it, but I think it was just coming through the Q&A format. No. You know what it is? She always comes back to the spirit of the precepts.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's not, don't hold it literally. She was
Mhm.
always telling us, go back to the spirit of the precepts, and you have to get that from reading the origin stories or, discussing how it works in your life.
Yeah. Yeah. And that was very much how Venerable Wuyan also taught us. Yeah. See what the motivation, why the Buddha gave that precept. What affliction in our minds did he want to point out that needed to be subdued, and then figure out how to apply that, and the instruction of the precept in a way that fit with our own culture. So if I give you an example, we have a precept not to ride in vehicles. Well, of course, we all ride in cars and buses and trains and planes and everything like that. They didn't have all of that at the time of the Buddha. But, why did the Buddha make that precept? Well, first of all, in ancient India, if you traveled in a vehicle, you were a king or a minister, somebody very high class. And second of all, it was always either an animal or another person pulling the vehicle. Yeah, they didn't have automated or motorized vehicles at that time. So the purpose was, I think, not to cause pain to others, but also not to be arrogant and think, oh, I'm so important. Look, I'm riding in a vehicle, somebody else is pulling it. So how do we adapt that to living in the West? For me, I adapted by, when you have a sponsor pick you up to go teaching or to go for an activity, you don't care at all what kind of car they drive. Okay? And people will pick you up in all kind of cars. Some are clean, some are dirty, some are expensive, some are cheap, and you have a mind that you don't care. Yeah. And so you don't get arrogant because somebody's picking you up in an expensive car. Yeah. And you try not to make things inconvenient for the lay people when they do drive you somewhere. So that would be one example. Okay. Yeah.
那黑人，我想我们尽量把握时间，让10点师傅他们也要休息。我们今天在10点结束。哎，我们这边提个问题，看是不是可以请师傅、启示师傅，好吗？
I have a question about this. Is that venerable Henching have any idea about the Theravada Buddhism? Because they still do not have Bhikshuni lineage. Any opinion about the Theravada Buddhism?
Oh, yeah. Actually, the Theravadas now do have Bhikshuni ordination. Yeah. In 1998, the master of Fokwan Shan, Venerable Shunyan, he held a big ordination in Bodh Gaya, Bhikshuni ordination. And Venerable Karmalekshe Somo and I were invited to be part of the Bhikshuni Sangha that gave the ordination. So there were some nuns from Sri Lanka who came for that, and they became Bhikshunis. And there were some Sri Lankan monks who were part of the Bhikshu quorum as well, and who witnessed the ordination. And afterwards, the Theravada monks took those new Bhikshunis to another temple, and they did a ceremony that they do in Theravada. It's called a Dalikama, in which they changed it because they had received a Dharmaguptaka ordination from the Fokwan Shan master, and the Theravada monks then made that become a Theravada Bhikshuni ordination. So this was 1998. And then those nuns went back to Sri Lanka, and some of the monks were very glad they had become Bhikshunis. Some of the monks did not approve, so they still don't have government support. But the monks that did approve gave those new Bhikshunis permission to be to ordain new Bhikshunis, even though they had not yet been ordained enough years according to the Theravada Vinaya to be Upadhyaya, yeah, or Acharya. But they gave them permission to do that. So they I don't know how many Theravada nuns Bhikshunis there are. I've heard like maybe 3,000. I'm really not sure. They're in Sri Lanka. A few of the monks, well, there were some Thai women who went to Sri Lanka and took it. There were some Western women who went to Sri Lanka and took it. So in the West, those Bhikshunis are giving the Theravada Bhikshuni ordination. And in Thailand, they did one or two Bhikshuni ordinations with the Theravada monks and the Thai nuns, the Thai Bhikshunis. But the Thai monks didn't like it, and so the Thai government made a law that the Sri Lankan monks cannot go to Thailand to give the ordination. But, it does exist now. And they actually restored it before. I mean, the Tibetans still haven't, but in Thailand, they do have Bhikshunis. Yeah. And so Venerable Henching, of course, she delighted in that. She was happy about that. But I don't think she had, she didn't have as much contact with them because they were already doing Theravada style ordination, and they kept the precepts in the same way as the Theravada monks did. Whereas, the Chinese and Tibetan traditions in terms of our practice are more similar than either of us with the Theravadas and how they keep the Vinaya. Yeah.